topic for this weekend is going to be skills for the Christian. And this is more, if you think about it, as practical skills. Skills that help you use the skills that you need. Just one of the ways I sort of think about it is that I can understand that a hammer nails a nail into wood, but if I don't know how to do that, if I don't know how to hold the nail without breaking my finger every time, if I don't know that I don't need to use the claw side to hit it, I can't really use the skill that I know about to hit the hammer. So a lot of these tools, a lot of these practical skills, they're basically built to help us as we go throughout our Christian lives, to help us use them in a better, efficient way. When you look at 2 Peter chapter 1, verse 3, it says, "According as his divine power hath given unto us all things that pertain unto life and godliness, through the knowledge of him that hath called us to glory and virtue." We're looking at these things that he's given us for our life. Just the things like communicating, self-control, empathy, these different things that just simply make our lives easier as Christians and help us to help other Christians as well. We're going to have a few different speakers this morning. First one is going to be Chris Abercrombie. Turn it off. First one's going to be Chris Abercrombie. He's going to be speaking on self-control. There it goes. Chris was raised in Sharpsburg, Georgia. His home congregation is McCorkle Curve Road of Christ, McCorkle Curve Road Church of Christ in Thomaston, Georgia. He and his wife Rhonda have been married for 26 years and live in Gay, Georgia. They have 3 children, 2 grandchildren, and another grandchild on the way. Chris is an electrician by trade and is vice president of DC Power Specialists, a family-owned business founded by his father 35 years ago. And he's going to be speaking on self-control this morning.
Well, good morning. It's good to see you all here this morning, and it's always great to be with fellow brethren. I want to say I enjoyed the singing last night. I had to do a lot of listening because I didn't know a lot of the songs that y'all sing. I grew up in a small church in Union City, Georgia. We only sang out of sacred selections, and that's kind of all I know. But it was really great to hear you sing, and I joined along as best I could. These young men, man, it was great to see them get up and sing, and it was so uplifting, and we just enjoyed it so much. Y'all got me in trouble as well. All you men got up and talked about your wives, and I got up here and didn't say anything. The first thing I heard when I got in the truck was, "Yeah, did you hear all them nice things they said?" I said, "Yeah, I did, but I forgot all about it." But however, I want to say my Valentine is sitting back there, and I love her so much, and I hope she'll forgive me. So, I was given this task about self-control, and I really want to tell you a story about self-control. Why that's not moving? Let's see. Going in the wrong direction? Yeah. Okay. I want to start out with just telling you a story about something that happened to me several years back. I was at work, and my office is about 30 minutes from home. We live in a little small town. It's nothing but back roads back to the house. And my dad reached out to me at work, and he said, "Chris, I need you to come to the house. I need you to work on this." And that's the way my dad always was. It was, "I need you to do this right now. It's not tomorrow. It's when I tell you, you got to come down and work." Well, I'd already had plans made up for that day with Rhonda. She had some things that I needed to do. And so I was kind of, irritated at your dad. You got to have my help. So I grabbed my tools and put them in the back of my truck, and I headed home. Well, I said, I'll take these back roads back to the house. Nobody's there, and I'll get the truck running. I drive a diesel truck, so I had it running pretty fast, being a little angry. So I come in, turn down the road. Here it is, it's stop road construction. There's a guy, the flagman, is sitting on a bucket with his back turned to me in the summertime with a sweatshirt and a hoodie pulled over his head. He's holding the stop sign between his legs looking at the phone. Well, I pull up on the first one there. I pull up and I go, what in the world's going on? Why is there road construction down here on this road? What possibly could they do? Well, I couldn't see because of the curve. I could only see him and the cones that he had set up. Well, I sat down and I pulled my phone out, put the truck in park, and just looked and just watched for a few minutes. 5-10 minutes went by, and I looked back, nothing's changed. So I'm getting more and more angry in the sense I'm thinking, how long am I going to have to wait? I've got all this stuff to do. What could possibly be going on that's just going to hold me up? 10 minutes later, I'm still sitting there. By then, there's 20 cars back behind me. I'm fuming. I'm like, I got to get home. What am I going to do? If I turn around, it's going to take me another 15 minutes. And I was thinking in my mind, I was going, I ought to just drive by those cones just as fast as I can and knock them over and scare him off that bucket because he still hasn't moved. So I revved the engine up. The old diesel makes a lot of noise. And he literally pulled his hood down like this, turned and looked, put his hood back on, picked his phone back up. Oh, then you're livid, right? You're thinking, come up and tell me what's going on. Why are we being held up? And then I just lost control. A few minutes later, I put that truck in gear, and I stomped it. Well, that 6.7 diesel will spin the tires. And I just flew right by him. And I got down the road, and I thought, well, great, Chris, what are you going to do now? You're an idiot. For all you know, the bridge is out down here. What is going on? So I come together in my senses, and I thought, well, I got to turn around. Well, it's just a 2-lane road, so I hit the ditch. Well, when I got in the ditch, the truck I didn't realize it was so steep. Truck's bouncing around in the ditch, and I get the truck turned around. All 20 cars is coming by me. So they're all looking at me in the ditch as they're passing by, and I'm sure they're going, what an idiot, They were going to go on down. I don't know what happened to them. And I finally get back up, spinning tires, get back on the road, and I come back up, and that guy was standing there, still had his hood on in the summertime. Don't get it. He's holding the stop sign at me, and then as I go by, he's turning like this. Just like that. And I thought, well, who's the idiot here? It was me, right? I lost my self-control. I lost it. And then when I got home, I get to Dad's house, I open the tailgate up. I had all my tools thrown completely all in the back of the truck. And he looked at me and says, what are you doing with your tools? I said, I don't want to even talk about it. But that's the way our mind works a lot of times when we think about that, think about self-control, that we have those problems, and it all starts in our mind. The applications for self-control, just a few of them, why we need self-control is bad habits or addiction. Maybe our reputation, if we don't have a good reputation because of maybe we don't do the things that we should with the people we know. Perhaps it's our work ethic, how we talk, the tongue, and what we say. Our relationships, and also our spending habits. All these things are controlled by self-control. 2 Peter chapter 1, verses 5 through 8 says, but also for this very reason, give all diligence. Add to your faith virtue, to virtue knowledge, to knowledge self-control, to self-control perseverance, to perseverance godliness, to godliness brotherly kindness, and to brotherly kindness love. For these things are yours and abound. You will neither be barren nor unfruitful in the knowledge of your Lord Jesus. That we need to add that to our lives. Yesterday when I was coming here, just thinking about God testing me with my self-control. Rhonda and I are traveling. We get on the interstate. I forgot to get fuel in the truck. So I've made a stop. We stopped at the place, and there's 5 open gas pumps, but for whatever reason, people love that green diesel pump. I don't know why, but they always want to park there on the pumps. Well, the only 2 pumps at the Love station, there's only 2, one on each side. There's 2 people's cars sitting there with their wives in the car, just kind of sitting, no pump being used. So I pull up and I tell Rhonda, can you believe this? Why can't they use the gas pump? I know they don't know. I was talking about all of those things. Finally, I just said, let's just go to another gas station. I'm tired of sitting here. They're inside playing or doing something. I don't know. So we left and we went to the next one. Well, they didn't have any diesel. Okay, let's go to the next one. We go to the next one. go down another exit, we go to the next one. I set the pump up, turn it on, go inside looking for DEF fluid, because you got to have that for a diesel, right? I was low on that as well. They didn't have that. I come back out, $50 later, the pump cuts off. Then I go, I got a 55-gallon tank. I don't want to sit here and pump $50 worth every time until I finally fill the truck up. So I just stick it back in there, go to the next pump. Finally, after 4 gas stations, I get the truck filled up and get the DEF fluid. And I told Rhonda, I said, God's really testing me today to make sure I can handle this. So for all y'all people that just know that if you have a gas car, don't park at the diesel pumps, because it irritates us really bad. It tries our self-control. So what do we apply this to? And I really want to tell you, I said all that to say this. Self-control starts with our thoughts. That's exactly where it comes from. It's always how we think that causes this. In fact, everything we're going to discuss this morning is going to go back to our thought process. Romans chapter 8, verses 5 and 6 says, "For those who live according to the flesh set their minds on the things of the flesh, but those who live according to the Spirit, the things of the Spirit. For to be carnally minded is death, but to be spiritually minded is life and peace." It all comes down to how we think and how we react to those thoughts. It's like the angel on one side and the devil on the other, and that's so true. That's what happens to us in our minds. We have to really process it in a way to say, I'm going to do what's right, or I'm going to lash out, or I'm going to do these things that are wrong. So always think about that when you're having these things in your mind about self-control, to control it based on what's good. As to be spiritually minded is life and peace. Philippians chapter 4, verses 6 and 8 says, "Be anxious for nothing, but in everything, by prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving, let your requests be known to God. And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds through Jesus Christ. Finally, brethren, whatever things are true, whatever things are noble, whatever things are just, whatever things are pure, whatever things are lovely, whatever things are of good report, if there be any virtue, if there be anything praiseworthy, meditate on these things." It's all in the frame of mind. It's all in how you think. It's all in putting these things and implying what Christ and God would have us to do, to focus on those things, to change. My family is full of hotheads. We've always been that way. My dad was terribly, terribly hot-headed. And growing up, seeing him do some of the things, just snaps, when he would get mad. And I hate to tell all that, but it's something I have to work on constantly because of my thought process. His was the same. He had a lot of problems with that growing up, or when I was growing up, watching him do things. One of the things that my dad had problems with, he was allergic to bees, highly allergic to bees, but he hated bees. And when he saw them, Dad wanted to kill them. He didn't want them to live, because if he got stung, he would swell up really bad. Well, one particular time he took me to work. I was probably 10 years old. And we went in to a building. We did all the work. We were coming out. There's a wasp nest about this big on the side of the building, just full, covered in red wasps. He reached down in the flower bed. He said, "Oh, stinking wasp." And he threw the rock up, and it hit it. It fell down. Well, one came down and stung him on the hand. And then, of course, being young, I didn't really realize what would happen. By the time we got in the truck, we got in, his hand had doubled the size. It looked like Jameson's hand, it was huge, So much so that he could push his thumb in it, and it'd go down about an inch in his hand. He never said anything about throwing rocks at the bees, and I didn't say anything either. But by the time, 30 minutes later, he was having to drive with his hand holding his eye open because his face was swelling up so much, We had those issues, but it was that frame of mind. He could have left those bees alone, right? And just kept on trucking, and he wouldn't have had any problem. But we got to realize that we got to be thinking about these things and doing the right thing and stay away from that. 2 Corinthians 10 and 5 says, casting down arguments and every high thing that exalts itself against the knowledge of God, bringing every thought into captivity to the obedience of Christ. We've got to control our thoughts, and we've got to think about everything we do. Don't lash out fast like, for instance, my dad did. We've got to try to always think about what we're doing and make the correct and right decision. How about our eyes? When we think about self-control, our eyes, Luke chapter 11, 33 and 36 says, no one, when he has lit a lamp and puts it in a secret place or under a basket, but on a lampstand, that those who come in may see the light. The lamp of the body is the eye. Therefore, when your eye is good, your whole body also is full of light. But when your eye is bad, your body also is full of darkness. Therefore, take heed that the light which is in you is not darkness. If then your whole body is full of light, having no part dark, the whole body will be full of light, as when the bright shining of a lamp gives you light. We think about that, think about our eyes and what we see. That affects our thoughts. That affects what we do. Our eyes, if we are full of watching things, it's probably not good for us to watch. Doing things and seeing things that we shouldn't. You know, I look at it today, it's so hard because of the things we have. We have the internet. We have things that are always accessible. Things popping up that we're not even looking for that pop up. And there's so much things that are so different than what, and a lot of you guys are older than me, so y'all know more about it than I do. But the eyes, the things that we see that have changed. You know, when I was a kid, I could watch TV and there was barely a cuss word on TV. Barely. Today, it's nudity. It's homosexuality. It's crazy, terrible words that we see. It's one of those things where it's hard to know if you want to watch something because you don't know what you're going to get to see in there. You know, I love these old shows, and I get picked at a lot because I watch Perry Mason and Andy Griffith and Barnaby Jones. It's probably the earliest one I really like. But I watch those because I look at that and I think about how things used to be, but also how clean it is. And I want to keep my eyes away from that. My daughter told me to watch some movie, and I turned it on. She said, "You'll really like this movie. It's this." And then less than 5 minutes, I said, I probably don't need to watch this show. It's too vulgar for me. I don't need to be infected with these things in life and let that get into my mind. You know, I think a lot of times we don't realize that what we watch and what we do is so similar to who you hang out with. If you hang out with people that do drugs, well, guess what? Chances are you're going to start doing drugs. You hang out with people that drink or do other things that you don't want to do, they can pull you to that. Stay away from those things. Get away from the things that are problems in your life that with your eyes. How about our emotions? Ephesians chapter 4, verses 26 and 27 says, "Be angry and sin not. Do not let the sun go down on your wrath, nor give place to the devil." So then, James chapter 1, verses 19 and 21 says, "So then, my beloved brethren, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath. For the wrath of man does not produce the righteousness of God. Therefore, lay aside all filthiness and overflowing wickedness, and receive with meekness the implanted word, which is able to save your souls." Be swift to hear and slow to speak, to think about what you're going to say. You know, the problem with anger is usually we just lash out at someone without really thinking. It's just usually about me. You did something to me, so I'm going to lash back out at you. It's a work that I've had to really, really work on for me, because I would lash out at people really quickly when they did something to me. But I keep going back to these scriptures that tell me to be slow to speak, slow to wrath. The thought process, think about the things you say. You know, we can't take those things back once they're said, so we have to be careful with that. Proverbs chapter 15 and 18 says, A wrathful man stirs up strife, but he who is slow to anger allays contention. Proverbs 29:11 says, a fool vents his feelings, but a wise man holds them back. That's what we must do. Again, it goes back to our thought process. Give yourself time to weigh the options. Give yourself time to think what's right and what's wrong. How about our words? Proverbs chapter 10, verses 19. Then the multitude of words, sin is not lacking, but he who restrains his lips is wise. Colossians 3:8-9 says, but now you yourselves are to put off all of these: anger, wrath, malice, blasphemy, filthy language out of your mouth, and do not lie to one another, since you have put off the old man with his deeds. Our words are important, what we say, and we need to think about those words. Not long ago, I was up in North Carolina. I went to a meeting with some engineers, some Verizon engineers. That's who we primarily work for. And we were talking about sin. The two men were professed Christians that I was with, and one of them I had just met. And we were talking about sins, and we all have sin that we have to fight, probably more so than the next guy. It's a sin that really affects me. And we were coming across those things, and he said, well, yeah. He said, I like to curse. He said, that's my sin. He said, it's terrible. And then as soon as he said that, he started cursing. And I mean, he didn't curse. He cursed like a sailor throughout the rest of that conversation. And I thought, are you really thinking about what you're saying? Are we really thinking about those things when it happens? Of course, what do you say in that situation? It doesn't sound like what we need to be doing. It gave me the perspective of, hey, I need to change if I'm doing those things. We shouldn't be talking that way. We should not have these problems, and we shouldn't accept them. And I look at it in this way. He reasoned in his mind that this is what he was going to do, and he was just going to accept it. It brings to mind another guy that I was talking with that was talking with me about speeding. And he said, well, Chris, he said, I know it's wrong to speed, but if I don't get caught speeding, is it really wrong? And I said, well, let's think about that. I said, if I murdered somebody and I didn't get caught, does that mean I didn't murder them? He said, well, what if I get caught and I pay the ticket? Is it still okay? Am I still not sinning? I said, well, if I don't get caught murdering somebody, does that mean, or if I get caught murdering and I serve the time, then it's okay. It's still wrong. But in his mind, he had reasoned with those things in his mind to make it right. We have to be careful with that, because even in this example about our words, we can justify it even if it's wrong. Remember to always think about it in Christ and God's way of thinking. How about our bodies? 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, 3 and 5 says, for this is the will of God, your sanctification, that you should abstain from sexual immorality, that each of you should know how to possess his own vessel in sanctification and honor, not in passion of lust like the Gentiles who do not know God. But we've got to stay away from those things. It might not be a problem, and you may say, well, I'm not going to run around with my wife. What if I'm watching pornography? Or what if I'm doing these things? Maybe I say, well, I'm not doing it. And our mind will say, well, I'm not really doing this, so it must be okay to do this. It's still wrong. It's still wrong to do. We must flee from that. 1 Corinthians 6, 18 and 20 says, flee from sexual immorality. Let every sin that a man does outside the body is outside the body, but he who commits sexual immorality sins against his own body. Or do you not know that your body is the temple of the Holy Spirit who is in you, whom you have from God, and you are not your own? For you were bought at a price. Therefore glorify God in your body and in your spirit, which is God's. That the Holy Spirit lives within inside us, and he's telling us those things are wrong. And most of the time we do know things are wrong. We know it in our mind. It's just whether we're going to justify it to be okay. We're going to say it's all right to do these things. So I say all that, and I ask the question to myself is, how do I regain my self-control or maintain it? Well, the first person that I thought about was Joseph. And we think about all the things that he did, and we'll talk about it in a second. I forgot this one slide. Sorry about that. Romans 8, verses 12 and 14 says, "Therefore, brethren, we are debtors, not to the flesh, but to live according to the flesh. For if you live according to the flesh, you will die. But if by the Spirit you put to death the deeds of the body, you will live. For as many as led by the Spirit of God are the sons of God." That we allow God to live through us and we do what he has for us to do. We think about him first. So when I was talking about Joseph, I want you to really think about Joseph. I think he was a great person of self-control. You know, he had so many reasons to be mad, and we don't see that in the Scripture. You think about him just being sold into slavery out of envy of his brothers because his father loved him the most. But he gets angry about that, but he does the right thing. You think about all the things that happened to him, and we're going to read a little bit about Potiphar's wife, and we realize he was sold into Potiphar's house, and then he ends up being the number one servant for him, and then his wife comes after Joseph. And we'll read here in Genesis 39, 6 through 9. He says, Thus he left all that he had in Joseph's hand. We're talking about Potiphar here. And he did not know what he had except for the bread which he ate. Now Joseph was handsome in form and appearance. And it came to pass after these things that the master's wife cast longing eyes on Joseph. And she said, "Lie with me." But he refused and said to his master's wife, "Look, my master does not know what is with me in the house, and he has committed all that he has to my hand. There is no one greater in the house than I, nor has he kept back anything from me but you, because you are his wife. How can I do this great wickedness and sin against God?" We think about Joseph and how he handled that situation. Now we realize that he was a young man. I think if you go back and you look at Genesis 37, it talks about him being 16 years old at that time. But we know he was a young man at that time. A young man that was like any other man, you might say, at that age. But he opted to do the right thing here. In fact, when we think about it, he accepted that responsibility and said, "No, I'm not going to do this thing. I'm not going to do this thing to man." He had to reason in his mind what was right and wrong. He didn't give in to the fleshly lust that he would have had. I'm sure he had at that time. But he chose to do what was right and what would God have him do. We read on about that. How did he do that? Genesis 39, 10 through 12 says, "So it was as she spoke to Joseph day by day that he did not heed her to lie with her or be with her. But it happened about this time when Joseph went into the house to do his work, and none of the men were in the house, was inside, that she caught him by his garment, saying, 'Lie with me.' But he left his garment in her hand and fled and ran outside." You think about that, it was something that was ongoing. It was kept on being put in his face, that she wanted him to do that with her. But his whole way of looking at that was he was going to do what God would have him do. He stayed away from that. And what did he do? He changed his environment. I tell you, a lot of times, guys, we have to change our environment. We got to stay away from that stuff. He just got away from the situation. He didn't fall in or give in, because your mind's going to tell you to justify that, because it wants to fulfill those lusts that you have in your life. He changed it. He moved, and that's what we're expected to do. And we also see that he acknowledged the presence of God. When we think about that, Genesis 39 and 9, we already read this, but what was his comment here? It says, how can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? It was in his mind that when she was asking him to do that it was wrong. And we have that same thing. It's just whether we want to give in or we don't. When we think about his brothers, Genesis 50 and 20, he makes this statement to them because he's now the second to Pharaoh. He has the ability when his brothers come, because they're basically starving to death because of the famine, and he's got them kneeling down in front of him, and he has the ability to just have them killed right there. No problem. He didn't get angry in that situation. He put it back and acknowledged it was for God. He says, but as for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good in order to bring about as it is this day to save many people alive. He found that God was in charge of his life, and he was going to do what he was told to do, and he saw the good that was coming out of it. He put aside all the anger, put aside all those things, and he said, there's a purpose for this. That's what we got to really think about. We got to think about that in our minds and always weigh these options. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm saying that's what God would have us do. I know that I'm about me most of the time. Rhonda will tell you that I'm about me and what I like and what I want to do. And we all are in that situation, right? And when somebody does something to us, we want to retaliate, right? I know that's just human nature. But God tells us to stay away from that, to do the right thing, to put ourselves aside and put him ahead of everything else. That's what God is asking us to do. And it is difficult sometimes. I'm not saying it's easy. But we have to always think about what is right and what he's asking for us to do. So the biggest thing I can say in concluding it is we have to put ourselves under God's control. If we want to have self-control, we'll do that. Galatians 20 or Galatians 2 and 20 says, "For I have been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ lives in me. And the life which I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me." Paul telling the Galatians that he puts on Christ. He's going to do what Christ asked him to do. I think that bracelets that everybody used to wear, "What would Jesus do?" would be a great thing for us to wear and remind ourselves. At least put that in our minds. What would Jesus do in our lives? Focus on that first. Think about what he's asking us to do and do that, because he lives in us. And we got to follow what he says. Now, given Paul still made mistakes, when you look at Romans 7 and he talks about the things I wish I could do that I don't do, and the things that I say I'm not going to do, that's what I do. We know that those things happen, but it's always a work to improve and get better. Acknowledge him as in your life and put him in control. I thank you so much for your kind attention this morning, and I'll turn it over to the brethren.